be right back. So the official start time has arrived, but the join rate is still very high. We'll wait a few minutes as people get connected. As you join, we encourage everyone to share audio and video. We don't run a queue. This is an interactive conversation, but please remember that the meeting is being recorded and will appear on YouTube. The join rate is still high. So for those of you that have just joined, we're waiting a couple of moments to start. All right, the join rate is starting to slow down. We'll go ahead and get started. Repeating, we encourage everyone to share audio and video, but do remember that the session is being recorded and will appear on YouTube later. We aren't running a queue at these meetings. At any point, if you've got something to say, just jump in. If we find ourselves excited enough about some topic that we need a queue, we'll just call for the queue at that time. The notes have the intended agenda. Remember that you can use the expand all feature at EdgeDoc to see an outline of the notes. It's a nice quick way to see an outline of the agenda when there's a lot of text in amongst the agenda topics in the notes already. Does anyone have any agenda bashes? Anything that they'd like to add or move around? Not hearing anything, we can jump in. The first thing I'd like to do is to introduce everyone to our newest LLC senior developer, Rudy Matz. Rudy, if you'd like to say hello.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Rudy. I'm originally from Germany, but based in Montreal. I joined the tools team about a month ago. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
What Rudy's done so far has been fantastic on coming up to speed on the data tracker code base in particular. So the first topic that I'd really like to launch into is there anything that came out of 122 that anyone here wants to point to as something we should change, or something that went particularly well that we should build on, Are there takeaways from 122 that we haven't already captured as issues? We had a pretty smooth 122 from a tools operation perspective. We didn't have any data tracker outages or any other impedance points with the tooling.
I just had a minor thing that I opened an issue on. That was if you go in the data tracker agenda page and then click on the material thing and then open slides or whatever, they open in the same pop-up box and then you cannot go back. So it would be good to open them in a separate window or tab or whatever.
Yeah, we've started having a conversation internally about what's possible to do with that. So. All right, any other points from 122 that anybody wants to call out? So the next topic that we've got is a wave top level description of what happened at the tools retreat. We have a blog post in preparation that will go into more detail, but we spent Thursday and Friday of last week in a pretty intense session. We had the entire tools team. We had the communications director from the RPC and the IETF's communications director, the executive director, and we had remote participation from the IETF chair and Alice from the RPC. So we covered a very large number of topics in the time that we had, and it wasn't because the conversation was superficial. We actually had a couple of days where we were all walking away with our brains completely wrung out. So the big takeaway points, just as I said, touching the wave tops again. We're aware that the roadmap presentation that we've been using so far, while it's been useful, it may, in its current form, be hitting the end of its use. We really need to find a different presentation that better represents projects that span beyond just between IETF intervals, captures a little bit of history, and definitely gives a little bit more detail and insight into what each of the roadmap items are about. We're exploring visualization mechanisms that we can use to make the roadmap better than it has been so far. While we were looking at the actual relative importance of the things on the roadmap, it became clear the most pressing issue that we're looking at is bringing the tools modernization project closer to completion. We're facing a race there with RFC 10K, which will, by all metrics, happen be published in March of next year, which means activities that will require working with the number internally will start significantly before that. There is progress being made on the website and on the workflow management project on the editor that the RPC will be using. And we also talked about a direct re-implementation of the existing errata system, knocking off the worst of the pain points that the current errata system has around authentication, reopening errata, things of that nature. So that whole suite of applications is going to be a very large share of the focus that the team puts on making progress between now and 123. That said, it's also quite clear that the pent-up demand for feature requests that have been stacking as we've been focusing on the infrastructure changes needs some outlet. So we'll be parallel adding resources to start making these other feature requests start to move forward. That's going to include the long set of requests from the ISG, the primary requests from the IAB on liaison management tooling, and bringing the previous work that we had started but tabled on a cross-property search engine that would replace things like the search page for the data tracker, and the dashboarding, initially providing dashboards for the ISG back into active development. We also have a really big project coming up this year to integrate the data tracker and Mailman 3, allow us to use Mailman 3 credentials when we have to touch Post Aureus for list moderating subscription requests and posts. The goal in this project is going to make it so that basic list subscription management commands take place entirely in the data tracker. You may remember from a couple of years ago, Jay had put together a wireframe and distributed it for the functionality that he would expect out of the data tracker. The community's commented on it. The comments have mostly been, yes, do this and this additional stuff, as opposed to do something completely different. If somebody on the from the tools team from last week can find that link to the wireframe and paste it into the chat, it would be useful. There'll be a link to it in the blog post for sure anyhow. We also spent quite a bit of time talking about the changes in the tools team's activity over the last 2 IETF cycles because of the change in the world on the behavior of automated systems using our applications. So we've got a large number of AI bots that are scraping. We have a large number of things that we have no way to determine their purpose, whether they're intentionally attempting to DOS our systems or they are just DOSing our systems, trying to do something else that's not clear. It has caused a high level of interruption in most of our developers' workflows as we're reacting to keeping the systems running when these things occur. We're going to adjust our posture on dealing with these things to take more advantage of an organization that we've just hired to help initially with the mail services, New Machine Futures, to put that interrupt load in other people's workflow as much as we can so that our development processes return to the level of efficiency that they were before. The next bullet is we've had a plan for some time to split authentication out of the data tracker. Since we talked about it last, we'd identified a better candidate to move towards, Authentic, which is linked in the notes. This is an open source tool that will allow us to replace the OIDC provider that we currently have integrated into the data tracker with a standalone provider that has a much more robust set of features called out here: multi-factor authentication, the use of passkeys, integration with other large identity providers. We're planning on making this separation happen probably between 123 and 124, unless we run into significant roadblocks when we get to the actual implementation part. There are little details that we need to worry about. The data tracker right now lets people log in with any email address known to the data tracker. We can probably achieve exactly the same thing in Authentic, but it will require a little bit of customization to make it aware of all of the email addresses for a given user. So we spent some time talking about the collections of blocks that we have. So IP addresses that have abused the system over time have gone into firewall rules, block lists at Cloudflare, a few other places inside applications. Email addresses have gone into block lists at the post-confirmed level. There are email address patterns that are blocked at the postfix level. All of these blocks to date have pretty much been just add only. Things haven't been coming out of them unless someone complains and says, hey, I'm blocked, why am I blocked? We're looking at the size of these things and the age of some of these blocks, and we believe that they're now becoming inappropriate. So we are putting in processes to release these addresses and let them start accessing the services again. Monitoring them as we do so to see if reinstating the ability for a given IP address to touch things brings problems back, and then putting a process in place that will cause this to happen automatically in a reasonable period of time instead of just letting these lists grow without bound. We talked a bit about the work that we've been doing on putting artifacts into blob storage. What we've learned in the process of doing this, we had been targeting the blob stores becoming the authoritative store for artifacts like the RFCs, the internet drafts. We've discovered reasons to move that back to a database that's directly under our control and have the blob stores contain a copy that we can update at any time, burn down the blob stores, rebuild it from the database. That's going to be a minor adjustment to the work that we have completed already. And we expect that we'll be moving the next layer of this, how we're keeping the artifacts into the data tracker in the next few weeks. We identified that we need to change the way that we're using several things. The next two bullets were highly related. Some of that is when we were talking about moving to using RabbitMQ as a service, not necessarily somebody else's provided service, but our own separate service that's in its own cluster that has its own life cycle, independent of the other applications, which we're planning to do. We also talked about services like Memcache, where we need to make different choices for different caches going into Memcache, depending on the lifecycle needs of those things. One in particular is the session cache, which is the thing that keeps you logged into the data tracker even after the data tracker goes down and comes back up. That's going to have its own, we'll manage that with its own life cycle from the other things. But overall, the general story in those two bullets is we're moving several subservices that had been tightly bundled with the data tracker into their own management environment where they have their own life cycles and the data tracker just uses them. And what drove the conversation is that we've got a major release for RabbitMQ coming up. The way we're deploying it with the data tracker right now is going to be a little bit painful with how we manage crossing that upgrade boundary. And we realize that if we set these things up as a service, then they can just flow through, do their zero-time rolling upgrades as these services are already built to solve this problem. And we can just use that. The next bullet is a very big one. We had quite a lot of discussion around the opportunities that we would have if we shifted our production into DigitalOcean. There is significantly faster compute available to us there than there is in DigitalOcean, and a little bit better control over things like when database upgrades get applied. We're rolling the dice a little bit with the way DigitalOcean does its managed database services, where we just have to optimize that we don't have a database update land in the middle of the plenary. But the
Robert, you
yeah,
said DigitalOcean. I presume you meant Azure.
What did I say?
You said DO.
We are moving from DigitalOcean to Azure.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
Yep.
We're currently running production in DigitalOcean, and the issues that I've been talking about, where the grass looked a little bit greener on the other side of the fence, is over on the Azure side.
So, but you're buying the database, hosted database from each.
Correct.
Okay. So I don't know if that's a good idea. I have many customers that find that to be extremely expensive, very low quality, and have switched to just hosting it on a VM for the reasons of random upgrades, expense, and lack of access to actually the query logs and the explain analyze to actually be able to optimize anything. So I think the grass is probably brown and it just looks green. Yeah,
well, the CPU, the CPU part of it is definitely better. We've been able to get to the analyze queries, I think, on both services. So,
okay. Maybe it varies by which Azure location you're in and how clueful the people helping you are is. Yeah.
All right. But
I mean, yeah, more CPU,
check.
but just run your own instance of what you like and upgrade it as you think, anyway.
And Robert, when you say production, what do you mean there? Data tracker, mailman, or
all of it? So if you go to you go to the link that's at the top of the notes here, there is a graphic that shows all of the services. Right.
Okay.
And it shows where the services are running, and it mentions right now they're all in DigitalOcean, and we're planning to, in the long run, have them all moved over into Azure. Now, it's not going to be a flash cut of everything. We would be moving things incrementally.
Okay, will not be easy. And so we will maybe facing again the IP reputation issues for email then.
Email is not in DigitalOcean or Azure. It's in a separate service currently hosted in Panix, and that would not be.
Okay, and pretty sure that all the front end will be dual stack, right?
I didn't follow that question. Say it again,
so
please.
The data tracker itself and the mailman posterior interface will be IPv4 and IPv6. You know my question, right?
Both would continue to be available over V4 and V6, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. If it's not been obvious, the data tracker is currently running in DigitalOcean. Postorius is running on that Panix instance. It's co-located with the postfix and mailman instances running in the mail service. Michael, thank you again. We will go double check that we're getting the same level of access to the database knobs that we have at DigitalOcean. So, and one of the reasons we've been using the managed service instead of rolling our own is that we are taking advantage of the managed services already built backup mechanisms. And it's easy to just take their snapshots and high availability and move things off. If we were to roll our own, we'd have to build our own high availability story. So, next point is that we're going to make an adjustment to our backup strategies. Right now, we're backing up into Azure essentially in one region. We're going to make sure that we have at least our most recent set of backups in 2 clouds at a time. And for the longer term backups, at least going forward, we are going to make sure that they are not in the same, that we have them in radically different administrative containers, probably, different countries to the extent that we can. So just risk mitigation. A minor thing compared to the other bullets, but still a noticeable change for the community that's coming. We'll be moving from Zulip 8 to Zulip 9. Zulip's already working on Zulip 11, so we're still pretty far behind their curve. The transition from 8 to 9 is going to change the user experience inside Zulip quite a bit. They've renamed streams to channels. They've changed the graphic presentation of the user interface to make threading a little bit easier to follow, things of that nature. This has already been tested with Metaco. The Metaco integration stuff is not really going to change much, but if you're accessing Zulip directly, there will be a noticeable change. We had a pretty long conversation about the bib service. We've had more and more of our data sets at bib start to become stale. This is happening because the current bib implementation is relying on older versions of the Relaton data crawlers from Ribose. We are planning to move to using the current data crawlers that they have, just mapping the YAML that they create directly into the XML that you get at the public/RFC paths, putting that XML into blob stores and serving them directly from blob stores so that they are fetched quickly, and making the whole resulting object space available to the search engine that I mentioned earlier, which is a very rapid full text search engine, and just using the APIs at that search engine to replace the current bib.ietf.org search front end with something that is going to be easier to maintain going forward. We won't be fighting the impedance that we've been fighting with the current, turns out to be highly over-engineered solution. I'm taking a long time to go through this, even at the wave tops. So if anybody wants me to speed up, let me know. But we're close to the end of the discussion from the retreat. The other 2 points are we've had requests from the volunteer contribution community to go ahead and move the data tracker to black for some time. We've been resisting this because the rewrite that will come with it as lines move around to match the black formatting style. If anybody's not familiar with black, it's a Python code style rewriting tool that enforces a very strict way that code is formatted. That enough of the Python community has adopted that editors really expect to see it, and they scream when the code doesn't come in this particular format. And a lot of our code is not currently in that format. We are looking into using the gets ignore these commits when using Blame to see if the modern editors will do the right thing when we do this big rewrite, so that we can still get a good view of the real history of the code.
Hey, Robert.
Yeah.
I would skip black and go to rough. Rough's formatter is taking over in popularity and is better and much more configurable and customable and a heck of a lot faster to actually reformat codes. Food for thought.
Thank you. Anybody have an immediate reaction to that?
I seem to recall.
Say Wes is right.
Yeah, someone had brought that name up before. Maybe it was you at a previous discussion. Okay. Anyway, when you say configurable, that's a little bit of a, part of the point was to not be, but I think we can just,
Its default is it acts like black unless you change it. But you can say I want to use single quotes, not double quotes, and things like that. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think I at least looked at it at some point, so don't have a strong opinion otherwise.
And the last bullet point that we've got here is that we are running up against end of life, end of support for some of the underlying technologies that we're using, the data tracker in particular. We're going to be moving the data tracker from Python 3.9 to 3.12 as soon as we can. And then from Django 4 to Django 5 as soon as it is reasonable for us to do so. As part of the move to 3.12, we have a fairly long set of first order dependencies for Python modules at the data tracker. That's some 53 that we call them. We're going to go through a full review of those, since the move is going to make us look at them anyhow. And when we complete that exercise, we're going to put a more formal periodic review of them in place, so that we don't have to do the full set again all at once at some time in the future. All right. That was Wave Tops from the retreat.
Actually, I would like to comment quickly on two things. Sorry, I missed it earlier, but like on the roadmap, I really, really welcome that you take a more fine-grained approach, and that you also start some stuff in parallel, especially talking about the liaison tools. We have a few really issues that are stopping us from doing anything useful, and like those issues might not even be like big issues, so they could be maybe resolved quickly, but we really need that. So yeah, doing a little bit stuff in parallel would be good, and knowing exactly what you plan when, a little more details would be good as well. And then the second point, just out of curiosity, or just actually because I've been talking to some people in the AI Pref, in the new working group, about crawlers, and like a lot of people are worried about load of crawlers increasing, usually because of AI models. So we are planning, or like at least there's an idea that we maybe have a MapRegister session on getting a couple of reports in on this. So I don't know if you, I don't want to put more work on you, but if you have any kind of data you could share, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I'll think about what we can pull out that might be useful. I guess the high level immediate response that I can give you, I mentioned a little bit earlier. The sheer volume of automated traffic is very clear. It's easy to show that that's happened. It is not as easy to show that it is because of AI.
Mm.
Some of the AI bots identify themselves, many don't. And it's interesting that a lot of the increase is from certain regions. And in some of those regions, I think there are interactions with things like things coming out of China going through the firewall, where there may be changes to the content of the traffic that's not necessarily directly under the AI crawling bot's control. So it all, the interactions make the job at the end of the application that's trying to adapt what it will serve to differentiate what it does when presented with automated traffic from what it thinks is human traffic, very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, like we are trying to make the situation better for those bots that try to behave correctly, try to identify themselves. But it would be just, that would be interesting to know, like how much of the percentage is actually behaving kind of in a reasonable way, or how much of the percentage trying to hide. And the other one would be, that would be interested, would be, I guess depending on what the bot is trying to do, just accessing some resources or probing ports or whatever, you could maybe distinguish kind of crawlers that try to get content from actually attacks. That would be also interesting.
And that's really hard. I mean, the majority of the automated systems that are hitting us right now are very hard to distinguish from attacks. One of the distinguishing characteristics is that we'll have a net of at least 1,000 distinct IPs coming at us, to where any individual IP is not looking abusive, but as a whole, you'll have that entire network hitting the same resource a dozen times, right? For thousands of resources. And typically that dozens of times all happens, I mean, the pattern across those, all of the participating agents looks very similar. So it's clear it's the same script being fed to the agents that are participating in what it's doing. So whether or not the duplication is just a mistake on that side, or an attempt at redundancy on that side, or if it's an actual attack, it's really hard to see with what bleeds through.
I mean, again, I don't want you to do some additional work, but if you have any such data already, could be interesting to present. And also maybe just showing some examples could be interesting to understand the behavior that's out there.
Sure. One thing I put in the text in the Wavetop report from the retreat that I didn't call out while we were walking through it is part of adapting to this change in load is making even more use, and hopefully smarter use, of the managed challenge mechanisms at Cloudflare, which for HTML paths involves JavaScript that attempts to see if the endpoint is not an automated thing, right? That has impact on our real users, and we do have some subset of real users that get really cranky about having to run JavaScript in the first place and be challenged whether or not they're human. But it is the best tool that we have available to us. If we were to try to not use it right now, it would be hard to keep the applications up.
Yeah, I mean, this is also something I'm definitely happy if you want to bring this up in a MapRG discussion and make the community aware of that. John,
you are in queue.
I was just going to comment when I see Maria said that everybody's seeing the same problem. Even my tiny system is being hammered. And my guess is these are sloppily written AI crawlers, and the reason you're seeing them hit 1,000 times is they say, well, we'll just we'll run 1,000 copies of them, and what the heck. So I'm not sure who to ask, but given how widespread this problem is, there might be other resources we could cooperate with.
I mean,
Yeah.
actually, I didn't have time to look deeper into that, but I was doing a quick Google search just because I wanted to find something about this. And then the first thing I found was a lot of scripts that you can put into DeepSeek in order to create your own crawler. So I guess a lot of users are doing this for whatever reason, I don't know.
Life in interesting times. All right, I'm going to move on to the next topic. It's currently 40 past the hour. We've got 20 minutes left. So if anybody has anything high priority, I guess I'll stop for a mid-session agenda bash. Okay. There's been a thread recently. I put a link to the mail archive where it was covered that we note that there are several RFCs that are not encoded in UTF-8. This is kind of a follow-on. You might remember at the tools call last month, I noted that we have a large number of internet drafts that are not encoded in UTF-8, and that means not encoded in ASCII either, right? So that we default to the Latin 1 encoding when presenting them because it's a bucket that will serve anything.
But it's Latin 1 in the end.
Well, yeah, but it's all Latin 1 means is here is your application octet, really. There's no...
Oh, so that's what I wanted to know. Like, what were the brokenness?
Yeah. So for the I haven't looked for the RFCs. I would suspect, without having looked, that they are probably Latin 1. For the internet drafts, I think there's just encoding garbage, right?
I've started looking at the RFCs in the list in the message that you pointed to. Many of the oldest RFCs have a line at the bottom that's like, this was scanned by so-and-so, put in machine readable form, and either their name or their company has non-ASCII characters in it. So just some craft. Yeah, so for instance, I'll just, I put it in the chat. And then there are a few where there's smart quotes that went wrong. They shouldn't have been there. M dashes that shouldn't have been there. But like 3 or 4 of them are internationalization RFCs. So showing off some of that. So anyway, as I said, I started looking through the list posted to RFC Interest, and I can also respond on list with.
So I got a couple of questions here that I think are big questions for the community. I've asked them in the context of the drafts. I thought I had asked them in the context of the RFCs. For the drafts, I think at the last tools call, I got the answer that, just re-encode them, write them back in the correct encoding, if there is a correct encoding, right? Make them be UTF-8 and everybody would just be happier. Can we do that, assuming that we don't have something that has completely broken encoding and couldn't be just re-encoded as UTF-8 with the RFCs? Would it be acceptable for the bits to change if all it is just re-encoding? Michael is saying yes.
I have 2 answers. I mean, most of these are ancient documents over 25 years old, and frankly, I don't see the benefit of messing with them. The more recent ones, I think, are deliberate UTF-8, which we can just verify and say it's okay. But this does not seem like a good use of our time to go through and squint at random characters that somebody emitted in 1998 and try to guess what encoding they had in mind. Because
here's why I think it might be.
Okay.
Even more for the RSC series than for just the puddle of internet drafts. we have to write code that renders these things. For the ones that aren't UTF-8, we have to then capture that they're not UTF-8 and make sure that the code can do the right thing in the process of rendering, particularly when it is going to mutate them. In the case, for instance, of the inline errata. So having them just be UTF-8 has advantage.
And even without this real advantage, Robert, when I see what Jean pasted into the chat with Viageni with strange characters on the IETF website, right, or the RSC editor website, that's a no-go, right? So we should be eating our own dog food and making things correct. I mean, and I don't see what beside the time spent on doing this, I see no drawback.
And to be very clear, one of the things that the fact that we've got this mixed bag of stuff has caused, us to spend extra time on is building the plumbing to carry around a content type as we're shoving these things in the lava floors.
And it might not even be consistent, like some Latin 1 and then there's some UTF and 8, and you could imagine that. But in this case of the bottom tag where we added it and we scan the document for the purpose of future generations who want this archive to then say, oh, but you need to know this 300-year-old Latin 1 stuff to decode it. That's just dumb, right? Let's fix that there. That seems to me a no-brainer if it's easy to identify, and it Latin 1 to UTF-8 should be pretty easy.
So it's striking me as this is a place where we should be leaving artifacts of the conversation that we just had in the notes for this one. So if you've got, if you're willing, if you engaged in this, if you'd like to hammer your opinion in, I'd really appreciate it. Looks like Liz is on the ball. Thank you. All right, I'll move on. So New Machine Futures has been online. They've been helping improve the way our mail system has been behaving. The one issue that we ran into that was scripts that we had written before New Machine Futures was involved for maintaining our TLSA records. Those we had automated, keeping the certs fresh and keeping the TLS records in line. The automation scripts did not gracefully handle that the SSH server key for mail to was different than what was on IETFA. They were being reached by the same name from these scripts, and the attempt to do the rsync over SSH died at the, hey, wait, no, your key fingerprint changed. Do you really want to proceed spot? We're improving those scripts so that doesn't happen in the future, and we are continuing to build in a something that looks like a synthetic probe that actually looks at the certificate as served by the daemons, does the computation for what should be in a matching TLSA record, and verifies that that TLSA record is the same, and then alerts us if it's not. Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, thanks for looking into it so quickly. Do you have a timeline for when the monitoring is going to be online? I know I'm going to be asked about that.
Yeah, ask us again next month.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll yell again if it happens.
Yeah. Well, the timeline that the certs are getting replaced is somewhere between a 2 and 3 month cycle.
Yeah.
It's basically the let's encrypt cert bot refresh period.
I mean, the other obvious thing from an operational point of view is when things like the SSH key fails, that should have thrown an error that was caught because the process failed itself. So,
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Down without going into the deep, dark details, there was a redirect where there should have been a pipe, and bad things ensued. So, all right. What else do we have in here? Yeah. There were some issues with the move from IETF to Mail 2. The Mail 2 host that was constructed had a variety of different ideas about how to say localhost. They didn't all resolve quite the same. Some things were using : 1, some things were using 127.0.0.1, some things were using the string localhost, and the names didn't all line up correctly. Those have been fixed. That caused for a while DKIM signatures for IETF.org to be broken. That's back in line. We're expecting before we get to the next call that the DKIM signing will extend to the other primary domains. And there's work underway, as noted in the call, to go ahead and get what we not necessarily have as a fork of Postorius into an open source repository so that we can start working in a transparent way on the issues and the feature requests that have been added for the moderation activities inside Postorius in particular. Things like when you get email from it, that it contains a link so that you can follow the link to go do the job that the email is asking you to do. So on the liaison management tooling, we haven't started coding. We did have a meeting. I went to the meeting that the IAB held with the liaison managers. That meeting refined several of the requirements, and it reinforced the idea that the current liaison contract role that we have is not needed and can just evaporate in a puff of smoke when we do the tooling update. I did capture the Myria, just to make sure that you've heard it, that requirement to allow the from to be directly controlled is the highest priority and is separable from rewriting the entire application, and we will be addressing that at speed. So
yeah, and another high priority thing would be to give the liaison coordinators full access, because it's really, I always have to go to the sandbox to even see what's going on. But my understanding was that might be harder because we don't have a role for that, right?
I believe that's true, but I'll have to double check.
Yeah, but that would be also kind of pressing a little bit, yeah. But all over, I think it would make sense to kind of try to work closely on that. So if you have any questions, please come back to me, and then we can figure out what's the best way to do something.
All right, the last thing we've got in the hot topic section is to just let you know that the RFP on the cybersecurity services, the evaluation is still in progress, but we expect that to conclude very soon this week, and an announcement to be made on the selection for that RFP. The rest of it we have nominally under FYI. As in past meetings, we didn't really intend to read through each of them. This one in particular, since we're now 6 minutes away from the end. But if anyone has prepared text in those sections that they want to call out, or if anyone on the call has questions about what's in those sections, please jump in now. Awesome.
Actually, Robert, I had a quick question about the NIST and IEEE bib entries that were not being updated. Yeah, it looked to me when I looked through that they'd been fixed. Is that right?
They are not fixed.
So we're still using the stale.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, if you'd like to dive into the details at all, reach out to Kasara. He can
I'm sure he's
tell you
working.
much more than you want to know.
And by the way, I see
the NIST and IEEE are publishing the data, right? We're just not pulling it in, right?
That's correct. We were using an older version of the crawler that's now breaking on some changes that are from the raw feeds from those organizations. So, Eric,
Okay.
you started to say something?
Yeah, questions for Jennifer and Matthew about the purple. Is it a project name or a specific package? Or for the RFC editor, there is a purple between double quotes. I'm just wondering whether it's a project name or...
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, purple is the project name for the thing that had been the RPC workflow tool mishmash that we called something different every time. And
Okay,
then,
fair enough.
Yep, and you will also see red, which is the project name for the RFC editor website side of it. We haven't used that quite as thoroughly as purple, but
yeah, there's some cultural history inside the RPC. Their view of the workflow management had a purple background. So, and RFC editor, RED. So they just made for nice short names.
But a nice story, a very nice story, specifically for the Reds one. Yeah.
All right. Anyone have any other business? Thanks everyone for taking the time. And the next call should be at its normal slot on the second Tuesday of May. So I'll double check that and I'll send a note to the tools list if it turns out that that's not the case, but otherwise we'll work out. We'll see everyone online between now and then. And I hope things go wonderfully for everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.